What's up internet, Jordan here from Heir to the Mead, and today we're covering the 2-year tasting results on one of my earliest melomels, a brew I called DAYBREAKER. Without further ado, let's get in it. Like many homebrewers, I discovered the seemingly ubiquitous dragon blood recipe fairly early on, which I have mentioned many times on this channel as the starting point for my Black Dragon's Blood and Black Dragon Bomb variations. And I loved that recipe so much because my first attempt at it was head and shoulders above all of the other meads I had attempted, which at that point in my brewing journey were pretty much all either traditional, bochet, or Sicer. And in retrospect, I think what tends to happen here is that using whole fruit introduces tannins you don't get into your meads otherwise when you're brand new and don't have a clue what balancing and finishing even is, let alone how to do it well. They also just add more complexity and flavor. And people tend to make fairly sweet melomels because we tend to expect sweetness from fruit, which again, this all means that we're basically setting ourselves up to balance our meads without even knowing it. So my newbie self, knowing that Dragon Blood was much tastier than my other meads, even if I didn't really understand why, ventured off to Costco one day in search of that legendary triple berry blend to start another batch, and they were out of stock. In its stead, I found another bag called Daybreak Blend, and the rest is history. This particular bag featured mango, strawberries, peaches, and pineapple. Why 2 of those fruits are plural and the other 2 are singular, I have no idea. Now overall, I'm not gonna spend a ton of time on the process that I used here because this is a 2-year tasting video, and also partly because it was early enough in my brewing career that I don't use all the same techniques anymore. But I will say that the general process behind this is the same thing as Dragon Blood, it's just with this Daybreak blend of berries instead of the triple berry blend you normally use on Dragon Blood. Beyond that, the recipe was 13.875 pounds of orange blossom honey, 8 pounds of Daybreak blend, which is 2 4-pound bags, water up to 3.625 gallons. I was aiming for 3 gallons in secondary volume, 1 teaspoon of pectic enzyme, 1 packet of Lalvin 71B for the yeast. My calculated original gravity was 1.147, and my measured final gravity ended up being 1034, which means that my estimated ABV is about 14.83%. And now for the big question, how did it turn out? At about 6 months, this had a lot of young alcohol flavor to it. It was very hot with alcohol burn. And I mean like to the extent it wasn't even really worth drinking yet. But the underlying flavors were good. Unlike some of the other older meads that I've tasted on this channel that I've talked about kind of just being unsalvageable. So I kept it aging, and that brings us to today where we're able to review the taste after 2 years. The cork had a lot of pineapple aroma, which was very promising, but then the mead itself didn't really share that nose. It actually smelled weird. And in an unfortunate kind of way, at least to my sense of smell, and my partner agreed. So going just off the nose, I was honestly a little bit worried, but we tried a sample out in a wine glass instead of a whiskey cup that we had poured the first taster into, and the nose actually got a lot better, like more pineapple forward like the cork. We also sent this bottle off with some friends and with a warning that it might not smell great, but they all said we're crazy and it smells fantastic. So I'm not really sure what happened to that first taster, but it seems like maybe it turned out okay in the end. On the palate, it came through with an excellent tropical array, most noticeably, again like with the nose, pineapple. I also observed that, curiously, bigger sips actually bring the pineapple more forward. The honey character is also strong on this one, which I appreciated because I have definitely had some melomels where the fruit overpowers the honey and it's a little bit hard to pick out. The mead is a little acidic, so it could use some balancing, but nonetheless, it is far better balanced than many of those other meads that I brewed around this same era, especially ones that aren't whole fruit melomels. And if you've been watching some of my other tasting videos recently, you have probably noticed that the most consistent complaint I have about all of my older meads is that very few, if any of them, are decently balanced. I was initially a little surprised at how much pineapple won out over the other flavors in the end, but then again, None of the other fruits are particularly strong flavors, so it does kind of make sense. Overall, I think this might be the first 1 or 2 year tasting video where I would actually recommend the recipe to you without major modifications. And while there is room for improvement here, I don't feel obligated to spend tons of time talking about all of the hundreds of thousands of things that it did wrong trying to brew it, with the caveat that I do think this needs good nutrition. My theory is that the young alcohol heat this experienced for the first year and a half at least of its life was in part due to a stressed fermentation. This was early enough in my brewing process that I hadn't quite gotten all the way there yet with my nutritional standards. So while I'm very happy with the product right now, 2 years is kind of a long time to have to wait for it to age into itself, and I'm just not sure that it was actually necessary for it to take 2 years with this specific recipe. I have a feeling that better nutrition would have it age into this good taste zone it's in right now faster. And I think that might be important because I'm not entirely sure how long this is going to stay good for. BC over at Doing the Most recently described mead aging in a way that really resonated with my experiences in homebrewing, especially after the other 1 or 2 year tasting videos I've done on this channel. He describes aging as a bell curve. The idea that age does improve taste for a while, but past a certain point, the taste actually starts to decline. So today I can tell you that this recipe with the process I used hits its stride at about 2 years, and I can recommend that, but what I don't know is how long it stays at this good point. I don't know if I'm at the beginning of the curve or the other end of the peak, or how long it lasts. And that's where my emphasis on nutrition, if I were to brew this again, or if you were to try this at home, comes in. My hope is that a healthier fermentation would reduce the time required to age this significantly down to like maybe even just 1 year, and therefore widen the peak of time in which it is really enjoyable to drink. Beyond that, like I said, it is a little acidic. I'd probably try to add a little bit extra tannin, but according to my notes, I actually did have this on the fruit for almost a month, which is how long fruit stays in tannins for the no water meads, so I'm not sure that more fruit exposure is the right way to get more tannins on this one. It might need a bag of tea or even a little bit of tannin powder. Of course, I am still mastering the art of balancing. If you have any recommendations on how you would introduce tannins to a mead like this one, let me know down in the comments. Anyway, that's all I have for you today, guys. The fact that this mead didn't actually turn out horribly means that I don't have as many things to talk about in terms of what I would do better next time. So it's a much shorter video than the last couple I put out, but the bright side is that this one is a recipe that might actually be worth your time if it sounds fun to you, which is not the case for some of the things I put out lately, like the 2 year Bochet tastings. All that said, thank you for joining me, and have a good, however long until I see you again. 'Cause I'm still looking